There's a lot of us. but we won't be here the whole time. A huge welcome to all of you to the launch of the 7th food season at the British Library. We are so thrilled to be with you tonight. My name's Polly Russell, and I'm the curator and founder of the food season. I work with this amazing team, Melissa Thompson, food writer, Angela Clutton, food writer, and Joe Allen, who helps us with our PR and makes it all happen. I see so many familiar faces in the audience, so it's wonderful to welcome you all back, but also wonderful to see new faces too. The food season celebrates every aspect of food, and I don't need to tell you in this room, food is obviously the best subject, right? It is the most amazing subject through which we can understand the world, understand ourselves, understand communities, civilization, everything. Food season tries to get to all of these places with a huge, diverse program of different sorts of events. We try and showcase the very best and most exciting voices in food, and tonight is no exception with the amazing Jimi Famurewa and, of course, national treasure, Dame Prue Leith, who will be joining us on the stage in a second. I want to just say a couple of things. Just one is that we're doing something new this food season, which is that we have launched the Food Season Awards, about which Joe is going to talk very briefly about in a second. But I also wanted to hugely thank Miele, who are our sponsors across the season, and for who we just couldn't do what we do without their help. So huge thanks to them. And also just to remind you, the food season is talks, workshops, amazing experiences, but they also connect to this incredible library that is just full of the most wonderful food collections and treasures and stories about food from across time and space and regions. So do also remember that coming and exploring our collections here about food is really worthwhile. So I'm going to just hand over right now to Joe, who's going to say something about the Food Awards, and you can see QR codes and information coming up on the screen about those too throughout the event.
So this year we're launching the Food Season Awards. So we're doing an award on food on display, an award on narrative cookery books, and are partnering with the food publication Vittles to celebrate a new food writer. But we're also celebrating the amazing work that people are doing in food in the UK, both in and out of the spotlight, with the Food Season Food Hero Award. We've got an amazing shortlist made up of people doing transformative work, from the worlds of policy to production, food security to hospitality. And we're asking that you all vote for your winner. So you'll see, there it is. That's handy. So that is a QR code that leads to the voting page, and there's also a URL at the bottom, and you can find out more by searching Food Season Awards. I think it comes up with Food Season Awards because we've gotten to the top of that, which is good. And this will be kind of displayed at various events, well, all the events that we're doing, and tell you more about those is Angela Clutton.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Angela. And one of the many lovely things about the opening night of the food season is it's not just we four on a Zoom, because from September, October, November, all the planning, it's just the four of us talking about it. And it's such a privilege to think about the different subjects you want to cover, the different voices, the people you want to include. And there's a lot of arguing, there's a lot of hilarity. It's an absolute joy to do it. And then you get to this, and we're in a room with people who are hopefully going to have a wonderful time all through the food season. We have a big weekend coming up, which is 14 events across 2 days. It's going to be mad and completely brilliant. We are, just going to mention a few of them, but I say it's 14 across 2 days. It's a very nice way to spend Saturday, 31st of May and Sunday, the 1st of June. We have events about the food of America and Mexico and the Balkans. We have an event which is going to be tying in with the gardening exhibition here, which is thinking about how gardening for food can nourish us in all kinds of different ways. That weekend finishes with a martini, which seems to me like the absolutely great way to end a whole weekend of having gorgeous conversations about food and drink. Next week, we have a very, very special event. It's something which we tried last year, we brought back because it was such a success. It's Itamar Shulevich, yay! Who is hosting a gaggle, a throng of food writers, some of whom are here tonight, which is gorgeous, who are each going to be reading some of their favourite food writing, pieces that mean something very special to them. And it's so gorgeous to hear people reading work which means something. So that will be a really, really treat if you're around on Thursday next week. But tonight we have Jimi Famurewa and Prue Leith and Melissa Thompson to tell you much more about that.
Thank you very much, Angela. The best thing about these opening nights is that we get to do the set piece, which isn't at all awkward while you're waiting to say your piece.
Very natural.
Yeah, it's very natural. Yeah, it's like what I do with my hands. So we have hosting tonight, we have Jimi Famurewa, who is a restaurant critic, multi-award-winning food writer, broadcaster. You'll have seen him on MasterChef. He does brilliant radio pieces as well. And he's the author of the brilliant Settlers, which I thoroughly recommend, and his next book, Picky, is coming out at the end of May. He's just an all-round good egg, a brilliant food mind, a brilliant mind in general, and he lives in southeast London. So without... I won't waste any more of your time. If we can give a massive round of applause, please, for Jimi Famurewa and Dame Prue Leith.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Melissa, for that amazing intro. Although the South East London thing maybe lost half the room, like the tribal battles. I do go north sometimes as well. I like all parts of London. Nice. I'm incredibly honoured to be here today and to be about to commence a conversation with someone who, as she insisted, is a food legend. Prue won't come on until it says food legend there. It's part of her rider as well.
No, it's National Treasure.
Oh yeah, that's true, National Treasure. Sorry guys.
You
Can we
failed
change
me,
it?
you
Can we
failed
change it
me.
live? But yeah, it's always a challenging thing to do an introduction and encapsulate someone's life and career, and especially a rich and varied career. But genuinely, if I tried to even get a bit of what Prue has done into an introduction, there might not be time for any questions. She's done so much and covered so much throughout a really illustrious and incredible career. Just to do a bit of a potted history, she opened the Michelin-starred Leith's in 1969 and Leith's School of Food and Wine in 1975. She has published 8 novels, a memoir, a brilliant memoir, I should say, and 14 cookbooks, including her latest, Life's Too Short to Stuff a Mushroom. She's also very good at titles. Can I just do as a little primer? What was your original name of the Leftovers book that you wanted to do when you were doing Bake Off? Can you remember? Yeah, okay. Anyway, yeah, it might have been like pre-Watershed actually, but we'll come on to that. She's also worked as a food columnist for the Daily Mail, Sunday Express, The Guardian, The Daily Mirror. She has a long involvement in education and the arts, was chair of the School Food Trust. She started the campaign for contemporary sculpture to be exhibited on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, so it's not just food, it's culture as well. She has damehood, of course. She has 12 honorary degrees, and she was also, for the Masked Singer heads, a singing flying horse.
Who could not sing in tune.
She is a trailblazer, an inspiration, and someone with an enlivening, infectious honesty, but also a deep compassion and tireless hunger for everything that life has to offer. She is, of course, the star of the Great British Bake Off, and she's the amazing Prue Leith. Give her a round of applause. I genuinely, most of these questions are about the Masked Singer. Is that okay? What's Joel Dommett like? How did you decide on Pegasus as a character? It's not, don't worry.
Just a swift little word about the Masked Singer. I could not sing a single note. In fact, if I ever stood in church and everybody was belting out Good King Wenceslas or something, I would want to sing along because I just always thought singing is such a, it's just such a wonderful thing to do. But as soon as I tried, my voice would my throat would close up, it would hurt. And no sound, never mind in tune, just no sound would come out at all. And so when they asked me to do it, I said, look, I can't do it. I'm tone deaf and I can't sing. And they said, we've never had a failure. We can teach you. Everybody can sing. Oh, I know. I've tried. I've had lessons. I can't do it. Anyway, but I thought, because there's a deadline to it, the day you go on stage and have to sing, it's just my one chance. So I said, okay. And so, of course, their budget did not remotely run to teaching me to sing. So I had to hire a private coach. And we worked really hard for about 6 months. My poor husband heard me belting out, at the top of my lungs, all these songs. And you know what? I don't think I did amazingly, but I did manage to make a sound. And I did enjoy it. And I now can sing Good King Wenceslas next to my children.
It's brilliant. And am I right in thinking that you were practicing while filming Bake Off, and like Paul could maybe hear you bellowing it out and slightly gave the game away?
Because Paul and I, when we were filming the Great American Bake Off, which, believe it or not, is actually filmed in Pinewood, not in America, we share a Winnebago. So there's his room, then there's his bathroom, then there's my bathroom, and then there's my room, and they're all in one Winnebago. So I thought, I've got these 2 bathrooms between me and Paul so that he'll never hear. And I was having Zoom lessons at the time. And so I was having to sing. When coaches make you sing, they make you make all sorts of terrible sounds that are not singing at all, but they're going, yeah, 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 and so on. Anyway, making a terrible noise. And Paul thought I was going quietly mad. But I couldn't tell him what I was doing.
Yeah. I actually wanted to start with Bake Off and then talk about other aspects of your life. I mean,
Sure.
A life in food, I think, is just such a fitting encapsulation of your career, your life, the amount of different areas of British food culture that you've interacted with over the year. It is kind of almost Zelig-like looking at your biography and stuff.
I've lived for a very long time,
Yes.
So I've been able to do a lot of stuff.
But I would also say you've packed in like a lot of things, like Prue. I don't think it's just that. Bake Off to me, and it's the show's 15th anniversary this year. Mm-hmm. It just seems to endure, and also your role in it. I'm really fascinated to hear what you think it is about it that kind of keeps it going and keeps it having this status of almost being an institution in itself. Yeah,
I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that the thing that binds it is the atmosphere in the tent. It's for the bakers, it's supportive and cooperative and kind, and nobody's going to be horrible. But for the viewers, it's a nice, safe place. It's like a warm duvet. Nobody's there's going to be no real stress other than that somebody's chocolate melts. Nobody's going to be horrible to anybody. Most television, one way or another, even drama, is so stressful for the viewer because it's so exciting and so terrifying and so, gory or in your face. And this is really gentle.
Yeah.
I think it's just switch off time. I think people think, oh God, yes, thank goodness it's Bake Off. We can relax. I think that's what it is.
I think you're absolutely right. That sort of, multiple tog, thick duvet that you can kind of envelop yourself in. What has it been like for you? Because I've seen you speak previously about the fact that obviously you'd been a judge on Great British Menu, you were well known, you'd had a long, very varied career, and you were a figure within the world of food, but Bake Off and the American counterpart have just supercharged fame, opportunities.
I know.
What has that been like?
Well, that's been fantastic. I mean, I really have Bake Off to thank for a lot of things, like, because I'm endlessly curious. I always want to do the next thing. Anybody asks me to do anything, I almost always want to say yes. It's very difficult to stop.
If anyone's got any kind of singing competitions or
I know.
very out there shows,
that's
just have a think. That could be the question at the end if you produce a contract, or maybe we can
I'll
get
say
something
yes.
going.
No, I am bad at that. And I think, you know, one of the problems with being 85 is you can't remember the beginning of the question.
Sorry. Yes, supercharged fame of Bake Off, what it's done.
Supercharged fame of Bake Off. It sort of shot me into the sudden thing of people running up to me in the street and saying things like, "Prue, I love you." It's fantastic. I mean, I love it. People keep saying, I mean, Paul Hollywood absolutely hates it. He's very good at it. He always behaves very politely, and he'll have his selfie taken and everything else. He would never dream, but he avoids anything that's likely to get him. And in America, they're worse than the British because they're so up for it. And so I love it. I like being stopped in the middle of Times Square and having somebody tell me they love me. I like the attention. But Paul tends to leave promoting American Bake Off to me because he finds it a strain, but he does it very well.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I love it, and it's given me a chance to do. I mean, I'm a born trader. You know, when I sold my businesses in 1993, and by then I had as you said, I had a Michelin star restaurant. I had a very successful cookery school, which is still, I'm glad to say, very successful, and a catering company, which is the thing that actually made the money. And I gave them all up because I wanted to write novels. And now, I've lost it again. I have to say, there's going to be a theme running through because I chatter so much and I gabble away and then I lose my thread.
No. We're all going to help you. Yeah, we'll keep you going. You mentioned working on Bake Off, and I think it's really interesting because reading your, again, exceptional autobiography as somebody who's just written a memoir, I was just kind of in awe of your honesty, your frankness, your humour, your life. Like, it was amazing to read. And one of the things that's really striking is that you're kind of right there at the advent of food on television.
Yeah.
I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about your very first kind of cooking segment on TV, because you can see both sides of it now and how it compares.
It was so funny. The very, very first thing that I ever did on telly was a friend asked me, it was in the early 60s, and the BBC were testing colour television. Everything was still black and white. And it happened, television only happened in the evenings, after 4 o'clock. There was no television in the morning. And so they had the bright idea that they could do colour testing of television by putting out shows that they wouldn't advertise, so nobody would know about them, but they would be able to test all the technology. And so they asked me to come and cook a dish. And I thought, well, I'll do a sort of one-pot fry-up, a kind of paella thing. Only no baking, just frying. Like a risotto, really. And so I arrived, and when I walked into the studio, I'd never been in a television studio before, and there was a table, and it had 4 rings painted on it. It wasn't a real cooker at all. It was just a table with 4 rings, and I had to pretend. So I put the frying pan on and said, when the butter's sizzling, and this lump of butter sat there. And then I said, when it's sizzling, you add the rice. And then I put the rice in, and the rice stuck to the butter, and I'd stir it frantically. And in the end, I had a ball of butter that ran around the pan, collecting peas and prawns and rice and stuff. And so, of course, I galloped through. I had 4 minutes, and I galloped through the whole thing because, nothing was happening. And then the poor woman who was presenting this little show said, "Oh, Prue," he said, we seem to have 2 minutes left. She said, "Perhaps you could show the viewer how to chop an onion. I've seen you chop an onion." So I looked around wildly and I said, "We don't have an onion." And she said, "Well, show us on a tomato." And she gave me an overripe tomato, and I had a blunt BBC knife. I tell you what, my debut in... And you know, the awful thing is that because I knew the show was going to be on, I told all my friends and my family to watch it. So they teased me for a bit.
Off to a flyer, I think we can all agree.
No, it was not good.
I do think that one really fascinating aspect of it is that there was just across the food landscape, if we kind of add in food media, there was a lot of just kind of making it up as they went along, it seemed. So, yeah, what was that like to kind of enter into?
Well, it was really, in a way, it was great because, you know, there was, I mean, for example, the Galloping Gourmet. What was his name?
There was like, real like, really acute noises coming from the, just at the mere mention of the Galloping Gourmet.
There are a few people in this room who actually remember any of this, so you'll help me with the names. But anyhow, there were 7 people in the room, in the studio, when he was filming, and he was always terrific, because he would calculate, he'd say, oh, okay, there's 7 people. He would be doing grilling a steak or frying a steak, and he would make sure that he did it 7 times. So that, you know, he said, oh, I got that wrong, I have to do it again, until he could feed the whole crew. And everybody knew this was happening, but you know, there was no big boss in the room to say, you know, this is cheating.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And what about, because, I mean, we hinted at it and you've spoken about it there, but you're entering this world and you're sort of cooking on fake, painted on rings. But in terms of your childhood and the way like food figured there and growing up in South Africa, it wasn't necessarily at the forefront of your thinking, right? It wasn't like you were kind of passionate about food.
No, because, you know, I mean, you've got to remember that I was growing up in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa, and white young women didn't become cooks. It never occurred to my family, my mother and father, that I would be a cook. We were all a very greedy family, and we ate very well. And the reason we ate very well was that we had a Zulu cook. It was very colonial, you know, everybody who was remotely management level had a cook. And our cook was Charlie. And nobody said, you know, you could learn to cook at Charlie's apron strings. He'd been trained in the best men's club in Johannesburg, which was all French, proper French cooking. And I could really have learnt everything. And I went off to Paris and then came back and thought, I was all full of myself by then because I'd been learning stuff in Paris. And I thought, oh, I know, I'll go and show Charlie how to make, you know, crêpes fourrées, you know, with seafood inside it, pancakes, stuffed pancakes. And we were sort of working together, and of course I suddenly realized that actually, I mean, I made hollandaise sauce and curdled it, and he quietly turned his back and uncurdled it. And I suddenly realized that he was chopping. Oh, I thought, oh my God, I had no idea that we had this treasure in our own kitchen.
That it was there under your nose. And yeah, in terms of, a word for Charlie's kind of good humour there with you bustling in to show him.
I know, some horrible young woman who thinks she knows everything, telling him, you know, man of 45 or something who'd had a great career in cooking.
But I think that's a really interesting point about like culture and class, and I've just been, you know, dredging through kind of old memories and stuff, and I think it almost in a similar way, I very much recognise in a Nigerian household, like there would be like of a certain class, there would be people that cooked and people that there would be a distance from the actual, you know, the business of making food. And I think also as a man or like as a young boy, there was this feeling that it was like, oh no, you don't, you know, the kitchen's not your domain. And so it's really, what's really striking to read about your story is, that you had to go to Paris and then to London to kind of, to sort of...
think, that's what I'd really like to do. I mean, by then, I had a go at... My mother was an actress, and a very successful one. And so I thought I would be an actor because I loved the theatre and I'd been to the theatre a lot. So I went to Cape Town University to drama school very quickly thought I didn't really want to do this. I love the theatre, but I didn't really want to act. And so I went to art school thinking, oh, well, I'll do stage design. And then the head of the art school came and stood behind me in a life class one day, and he said, I think he must have been Scandinavian, because I remember his voice very well. He said, what are you doing in my life class? He said, you have no talent. He said, I think you should stop now. He was very kind about it. and I was quite grateful to him, because that, you know, I was having a great time, and I thought, you know, 2 years in art school, that would be great, terrific fun. But I mean, I would have left, and I still have no talent. So then I went to do a BA. I thought I'll do a BA in philosophy and French. And then I thought, no, I really like French. I'll go to Paris and learn France. And my long-suffering parents put up with me. You know, they sort of had in their head 3 years of education. You know, that's what we'll bear. But she seems to be doing it all over the place. And then finally, when I was in Paris, I knew I wanted to cook. Because you can't live in... certainly at that time, the food in Paris, it was very classical, very old-fashioned, but it was absolutely wonderful. And I was au pair, and I would just watch a woman, the madame I worked for, cooking for her children. And she would make, if we were having, let's say, steak and salad for lunch, half an hour before, the children would have exactly the same meal. They never had anything different from what we ate. And she would make it, cook it from scratch. She'd make perfect little steaks for them, perfect little salad, you know, turning it in homemade French dressing, new potatoes, absolutely beautiful little plate. These children were 6 months old and 18 months old. And I would then whiz up the babies, and she would chop up the toddlers. And then we'd sit down at the table, and knees under, and we'd talk to them. And I thought, you know, I mean, it was such a great lesson. I mean, if only we all did that with our children, we just wouldn't have the problem we have now with obesity, with the NHS collapsing and everything else. Because those kids were learning how to eat well. And that's what we need to teach our children. Doesn't it? I mean, I used to just say, you've got to teach them to cook. But actually, it's more than that. They have to appreciate food, love food, and want to eat it. Because if they don't want to eat, we all know from diets, if you don't like your diet, you give it up. You have to like what's good for you. And the only way to get to like good food is to eat it.
Yeah. Well said.
So that's my lecture.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. We'll call it there. Thank you. That was brilliant. It's really interesting that kind of lesson and that memory has kind of resonated and like reverberated through life. How would you characterise what was the London food scene that you kind of encountered and found at that time?
Well, it was pretty dire, I have to say. I mean, I came here in 1959, so it was near enough the war for there to be this awful gap between what saved food was the Nouvelle Cuisine movement and chefs getting into the kitchen and owning their own restaurants. In those old days, all the posh restaurants were in hotels, nearly all of them, and they weren't owned by the chef. So it was very, you know, all sorts of awful practices were going on because they didn't have the machines we have now, which are amazing. When you think of that a Pacojet can make ice cream for customer by customer in a flash, so you get a freshly made frozen ice cream when you order it, whereas ice cream normally took hours of churning in a little bucket. You know? We didn't have the machines, and we no longer had the labor that they had before the war. So once upon a time, there were so many people, and they would be pushing food through a tammy cloth, you know, through a sieve made of cloth, instead of just whizzing it. I mean, if you think you can get a velvety smooth soup by banging it in a robocoupe, just and it's there, and you leave it for another 2 minutes, and it's unbelievably smooth. Which in order to get that, you had to push it through a cloth, and it would take two people winding a cloth together. So either you needed labor or you needed machines, and this was the period in between the two. And so we had people still trying to do escoffier. I remember chefs saying things like, if it's not in escoffier, it's not cuisine. Well, you know, escoffier had died, I think, in 1921 or something. And he actually, in the second edition of Le Guide Culinaire, which was his great Bible, which was the Bible for both sides of the Atlantic, the Americans and the whole of Europe believed in escoffier. And he was great at his time. And he actually said, if we do not change our practices and our recipes, if we do not keep up, we will simply lose our customers to other people who do. We cannot stick to the same thing over and over again. That's in his preface to his second edition. But culinary experts, chefs, and all cooking schools, you know, catering colleges, all taught escoffier, and they all would say things like, if it's not in escoffier, you can't do it. So they were trying to do his rather complicated French haute cuisine without the labor and without the machines. So it was awful. They were pre-cooking stuff, cutting it up into slices, and with what Elizabeth David once famously called the sauce industrielle would come over it. You know, they'd nap this, whatever was on the plate, it'd be slices of lamb or chicken or anything else, it would all get the same gravy on it. And waiters came around in plates, you know, the ceremony of the food still went on. Waiters came around and solemnly put this awful food on your plate. And then another waiter would come down with a stainless steel dish with a division in the middle of it with, you know, 2 kinds of potatoes and 1 green thing, or cabbage or carrots or something. And it didn't matter what you'd ordered, you got the same veg. So nobody was thinking, does red cabbage really go with salmon? Nobody was thinking like a customer until that in the 70s, when the Nouvelle Cuisine movement started, and people like Bocuse and the Trois Gros brothers and Roger Verger and all those people were actually thinking like customers, wanting the food to look beautiful on a plate, and wanting to think and deciding what went with it, instead of having the veg coming on later. So, I mean, people were much mocked Nouvelle Cuisine. I remember critics saying it was nothing but a little bit of nothing on a big white plate. And there was some truth in that, because it got so fancy and people were sort of, God, I better stop. Anyway,
but
it was awful, isn't it? Quick answer to the question. It was awful.
No, but I think that's really fascinating, and it's really useful to hear that. From your point of view, coming to it, in some senses, as somebody, you know, you'd been coming to the UK, Scottish roots, you know, but you were a relative outsider in some senses. You experienced French cuisine, and that had been your real sort of like, you know, eureka moment. Did you have the sense at the time that, like, were you agitating for kind of change and to do things differently? Did it strike you as, was there real culture shock there, like in terms of... Well,
you know, I went to the Cordon Bleu cookery school, and the Cordon Bleu was wonderful because they were absolutely stuck on French cooking, but they wanted you to do it the right way. And of course, in the sort of rarefied atmosphere of a cookery school, without having to worry about the costs of labour, because all the students are doing the work, you can be perfectionist. And so we were very well taught. I mean, I only did 3 months of the advanced course.
Was there something that really sticks in my mind? You describe spinach, the amount of times you had to...
Yes, you had to wash the spinach 7 times. That was in the days when spinach was grown in ground. So it had a lot of mud on it.
Yeah.
But we did have to wash the spinach, even when we had to wash the spinach in cold water, very icy cold water, because you didn't want it to start to wilt. And so, you know, there were some things which were ridiculously... pedantic, but we did learn really well.
Yeah, and with Leith's, with the restaurant, the opening of that, like obviously that kind of comes from the catering business.
You asked me if I wanted to change anything, or if I was feeling that I could lead in a way. I didn't feel that, but I think like all restaurateurs, I think anybody who opens a restaurant, at least their first one, they're opening the kind of restaurant that they would like to be in. They're reacting against something. They're thinking, I want a restaurant which, in my case, I wanted a restaurant which was not pompous. I didn't want, I mean, I wanted it to be very smart and very high-end, but I didn't want the waiters to be snotty if you ordered the house wine. And I didn't want a dress code. You know, it just seemed to me monstrous to say you want to take somebody's money, but you're going to tell them what to wear. You know, where did that come from? So we had no dress code. I also wanted, because we didn't charge, we didn't turn the tables over. We had, if you came to Leith's, you paid the same price. It was a 4-course, rather gastronomic menu, and it was a fixed price. There was a choice in each course, but if you only wanted one course, you still had to pay the full price. And so, but people loved that because they knew how much they were going to cost. We put everything in. There was no service charge. There was no, we just added all the tax and everything else in. So you knew exactly, only thing would be the wine that would change the society bill. So, and then we had things like, I wanted, because people were going to be sitting there all evening, I wanted them to be really comfortable. And you know, I hated that thing in restaurants where you're in a chair with hard legs, wooden legs, against a hard floor, and that you move it and it makes a terrible noise, and you can't get out easily if you want to slip out to go to the loo or something. It's all so I thought, what is the most comfortable chair in the world? And it's an office chair, because office chairs are designed for people to sit in there for 8 hours a day. So we had office chairs on wheels so that you could swing, you could swing out of them. I mean, they were beautifully covered in lovely velvet, so they didn't look like office chairs, but they were just office chairs on wheels. And we had, I didn't like restaurants to be so loud that you couldn't hear, but we had very modern 70s decor, so that was quite hard. But we had a turquoise carpet on the ceiling in order to baffle the sound. So there was a lot of things which today don't sound at all revolutionary, but at the time I was just trying to satisfy what I would like in a restaurant.
And it's fascinating to listen to you again, and from my vantage point of writing about restaurants and seeing it almost coming back round again, a lot of places bringing in almost like prepay or set menus, or kind of, you know, that restaurants are still kind of trying to answer a lot of these questions.
Yes, and also worrying about things like lighting. And we had theatre spotlights on the food because I wanted the food to be lit and not the customers. And so we had proper theatre spots. And I was very interested. I went to, I don't know how many of you have been to Park. Have you been to Park, which is Jeremy and you know, the people who had the Wolsey and all that.
Oh yes, the Park, yeah, Jeremy King.
Jeremy King,
yeah. Sort of Queen's Park restaurant, yeah.
And they've got, it's in the top of Queensway, and it's a very modern restaurant. It looks sort of a bit almost Art Deco, 30s looking, but the sound is absolutely brilliant. I don't know how they've managed to do it, but it must be to do with the spacing of the tables and the whatever it is, they've really thought about it.
Yeah.
So that although it's a very busy, bustling restaurant, you can actually hear what your friend is saying. And as you get to my age, I tell you, it's quite useful to be able to get a bit of help with the hearing.
Yeah, these things are important. I'm wondering, as you're talking, that kind of eye for detail, that sense of, well, why don't we just have seats that are more comfortable, that kind of lateral thinking. What do you attribute that to? Is that from your parents? Is it just natural? Is it just kind of, because it seems to be something throughout your career that you're not afraid, you're unafraid to be honest.
I am unafraid. I think it might be lack of imagination. It never occurs to me that I'm going to fail. I mean, it's ridiculous. But I mean, when I think now, I can't believe it quite, but I opened a restaurant having never worked in a restaurant. I opened a cookery school, having never taught anybody anything. I had no teaching experience. And, you know, I opened a I started my catering business just by being a cook for hire from my little bed sitter going around. But I was just generally enthusiastic and optimistic, and I think that thing of feeling confident about trying new things must come from my parents, because I think I had two brothers, and my parents were endlessly encouraging. I mean, they wanted us to do what we wanted to do, and they wanted us to do it well, and they believed we would do it well. You know, they just had this mixture of encouragement and belief in us. So I think I was a bit lucky. I mean, of course, in a long career, I failed at a lot of things, but I have not ever been daunted by the thought of trying something. Also, I think I'm very bossy. I'm one of those bossy women who always want to fix things. You know, things aren't right. I want to get in there and make them right. I remember when my children were little, walking down with one on each side. They must have been about 9 or 10. And we were walking down a road in Cheltenham, and a plastic bag was blowing on the pavement in front of us. And I just felt my son stiffen, you know. He was holding my hand, and he said, "Don't, Mum, don't. Please, don't pick it up." But of course I picked it up, you know.
That tendency does shine through, that you just kind of can't help yourself in the best possible way. You mentioned there that kind of bossy woman tendency, and a lot of there's been a lot of kind of really, really necessary conversation like about women in hospitality, and I wonder what it was, you know, what it was like for you. I've seen you talk about, you know, opening the restaurant and things that you faced and that atmosphere. Like, what was that aspect of it like? Did you feel, and I guess this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about who holds power in the context of food and restaurants, right?
Well, you know, I think one of the problems that the restaurant world had at that time, and still has to a small degree, though it's disappearing fast, was that there was a very army atmosphere. You know, you still talked about, we still do talk about a brigade of chefs. We talk about a mess, you know, for eating facility and so on. And so it came a bit from the army, and what the chef said absolutely went. Well, all of that is good. But what sometimes goes with that is a lot of bullying and things like initiation ceremonies for, you know, which is actually torturing young people. And because I had never worked in a restaurant, it never occurred to me that that's how you ran a kitchen. I didn't know anything about the kitchen. And and also the first few people that I hired were in my catering company, and they were mostly girls. Because in fact, the very first woman I ever hired was a friend of mine. And that was a mistake, because I had no idea how to interview anybody. And she played a very good game of tennis, and I liked her a lot. So I hired her. It didn't occur to me to ask her, "Can you cook? Can you drive?" I was delivering food all the time. "Can you drive? Can you clean? You know, can you shut the fridge door? Can you turn the gas off?" I mean, she was completely hopeless. And so I had to sack her. We're slightly digressing here, but I want to tell you the story.
Yeah, still very good tennis.
So I asked a friend, "What do you do if you're going to sack somebody?" I don't know how to sack anybody. And he said, "Well, the most important thing is to say, I've got to let you go. Because those words, 'let you go,' for her, it'll mean that she can feel that she's gaining her freedom rather than losing her job, and it'll make you feel better too." So the next morning I buzzed down. We were in a bed. I was in a little cottage at the time, so I was in the sitting room above the kitchen, and my bedroom was on the top. And I was at my desk in the sitting room, and I buzzed down and I said, "Jean, can you come up?" And so I could hear her chef's clogs going clog, clog, clog up the stairs. And with every step she took, I was saying to myself, "Jean, I have to let you go. Let you go, let you go, let you go." And she walked into that room, and I said, "Jean, you're sacked. Just got it completely wrong. And then she burst into tears, and I burst into tears, and we had a hug, and you know, today she'd have been straight off to the tribunal. but it was fine.
Again, that sort of that learning about being a boss and like business, like you keep kind of coming back to it, and it seems I've seen you speak previously that idea of business is something that you're kind of unabashed about having an enthusiasm for.
Well,
it feels like it's one of those things
that... I think it's so crazy that you know, if somehow we allow children to tell each other, or we tell them that business is boring. And I mean, to be honest, the main reason I went into cooking was I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be gregarious, creative. You'd be doing lovely food. You'd get fed it all the time, and I've always been greedy, so you know, I could see that there was a lot of advantages, but it wasn't because it was, I suppose, because I had absorbed some idea that an office is boring, that business is boring, and maybe because my mother was an actress, and that seemed very creative, and my father was a businessman, and I preferred her side. You know, I liked the theatre more. I didn't know anything about business. And we don't tell children that business can be huge fun. And I get just as much of a buzz out of looking at a P&L account with the right numbers at the bottom, in the right colour, as I do from seeing a sort of wedding spread at you know, our catering company used to do weddings all the time. And there's something really wonderful about seeing, if you've done you know, the wedding cake is perfect and all the food looks wonderful, candelabras, flowers, and you have that feeling of, we did that, we did that. This is before the customers come and trash it. We did that. And if you look at a good profit and loss and you see you've done a good job, you think, we did that. You know, it's the same buzz.
Yeah.
I think somebody ought to be helping children understand how much fun. I think it's happening now because a lot of people, especially since COVID, are inventing their own businesses and finding that it's hard work, but yes, it's satisfying.
Yeah, and I think you must be seeing a lot of that, whether it's contestants on Bake Off or on previous shows you've done. Like,
wonderful.
That must be a fascinating box seat, right? To just see how it changes. Like, you write in your memoir about marketing evening men's-only classes to teach men to cook, and I wonder if you remember that there was a guy that was particularly...
Yeah, no, it was very funny because when we first opened the school, we were desperate. Caroline Waldegrave was my principal. She was only 23, and I was 30-something. And we were both quite young, and neither of us had ever been teachers. But anyway, we thought the one thing we didn't want is anybody to think that we'd opened a finishing school for posh young women. We wanted the trade to understand that we were trying to teach people to go into the restaurant and catering and into the trade. So we thought one of the ways to show the world that is to have some men in there, because most sort of posh cookery schools were full of women. So we advertised for evening classes for men. And I remember the ad said something about, if you can't boil an egg, don't worry, you know, we'll teach you or something. And I was giving this first class, and there was a whole bunch of young men there. And I said, and the first recipe was for a chocolate mousse. And the first line of the first recipe said, separate the eggs. And he took one egg on one side, one egg on the other, took the two eggs and separated them. And it was a good lesson, because I thought, you know, when you write recipes, you have to know what level of, you know, separate the eggs could mean.
And you mentioned that because you've had a long history of writing recipes, and it was fascinating for me. I was very lucky to read an early copy of Ruby Tando, ex-Bake Off, her new book, All Consuming, and she notes something that happened to you where you kind of you failed to cross a T with some treacle
Oh,
or something.
that was awful. That was a
Can you
horrible
remember
story.
exactly
You're
what
going to
happened?
make me sit here
telling
disaster
really,
stories.
It's like a jukebox. I'm sort of feeding them in and like teeing you up.
It's because you've read my autobiography. But it is full of disasters. But this one was a real one. I had got the job of the cookery correspondent for the Daily Mail. And it was when the Daily Mail first produced Female, which is a sort of pull-out female section. And so I wrote the food for it. And one day I wrote a recipe for Oxford marmalade. And most of you cook, so you'll know that Oxford marmalade is the dark one because it has a couple of tablespoons of black treacle in it. And I was writing by hand in those days. So I wrote 2 tablespoons black treacle, and I wrote 2 TBS. But I forgot to cross the T. So you got 2 LBS. Well, 2 pounds of black treacle in a recipe for 5 oranges and a pound of sugar is not going to work. So, of course, the editor was pretty furious with me, and he made me sit on the switchboard and answer all the women, mostly women, who rang up in an absolute rage because they had, they say, what do I do with this goo in the pan? and it's burnt, because, of course, treacle burns very fast. And I've spoilt the pan, and it cost a lot of money, and the ingredients and the thing. Anyhow, we had to give away £2.19 and twopence or something. We're talking about 1970 or something. No, maybe, about 1972 or something like that. And anyhow, so I thought I'll get the sack, but I didn't. And then this was the time that the IRA were bombing London with letter bombs. And they were particularly targeting, obviously, politicians, but also newspapers who were very right-wing. So the Daily Mail was a perfect target. So we were given bomb training so that we would recognize a letter bomb when we saw one. And the policeman who gave it to us, I remember him saying, if you feel anything squashy in the packet, that's the Semtex. And if you feel wires, if you can feel what feels like wires in there, that's very bad news indeed. Anyhow, his main message was you have to ring security. Don't touch this, put it down and ring security. So I came about a week after this marmalade disaster. I came into my desk in the Daily Mail, and there was a bomb there. It was definitely a bomb. I could feel the squashy bit. I could feel the wires. And I was, I just remember going absolutely cold. And at the same time thinking, this is a bit rough for getting a recipe down. Anyway, I called the police, and they came along, and they took away the copper in a flak jacket came, and he took away my packet. And then about 5 minutes later, we were all ordered out of the building. The Daily Mail at that time was in Fleet Street, on the corner of Fleet Street and Carmelite Street. And there must have been 1,000 people in there or something. I don't know how many, there were perhaps a few hundred, but they were the bosses at the top. There were all the printers in the underground. There were all of us in the middle. And it was a huge building, absolutely full of people, all out in the street. And we milled around for about half an hour, and then we were told it was a false alarm and we could all go back. And I was given back my packet. and you will have guessed, I opened the packet, and inside was a piece of squashy marmalade toffee, and embedded in it was a wire dental brace. And it had 2 teeth on it. And it also had a large orthodontist bill.
So they just sent it.
And the Daily Mail had to pay for the orthodontist bill as well. And they still didn't sack me.
Teflon Prue.
Yeah, Teflon Prue.
Genuinely, I mean, obviously that was incredibly entertaining and sneaky by me to tee you up for that one. But I think it's really useful to remember, you know, recipes were written out by hand, and this idea of, and also the idea of people, a man separating eggs and people just blithely following whatever they're presented with. I think it just really shows just how much things have changed in some ways. We're now surrounded by YouTube and Instagram and shows like Bake Off and Great British Menu, and it does feel from the, you know, from that vantage point, like a culture, a British culture in particular, that is a lot more literate in the kitchen and a lot more kind of knowledgeable. I wonder how you
And
how
in the
you
high
view that.
street, I mean, the truth is that we eat far better now than I think most countries. I mean, yeah, at the top end, we certainly have more Michelin stars than most countries. We have great chefs all over the place. So I think the rich are very well served, and the middle classes are pretty well served, because the supermarkets now carry everything, and you can, there's a Thai section and an Indian section and a Korean section and everything in the supermarket. So all of that is terrific. What is not terrific is that most people are cooking less. And so if a child has parents who can't cook, or either have no time for it, or more likely have never done it and have grown up themselves eating takeaways, and that there's no way they can, because nobody teaches anybody to cook in school very much unless the head teacher thinks it's a good thing. I mean, do you know that it's actually the law that children are supposed to be taught cooking once a week until they're 14? But when the Labour government brought that in, quite a long time ago now, the last Labour government, must be 15 years ago, they did that because they realised that it was important. But they gave no money for it. And by then, all the kitchens had been taken out of schools, all turned into computer rooms or something else. And you can't teach cooking with no money and no equipment and no kitchens. So I think only about 40% of schools get any teaching at all. And it's mostly if the head teacher believes that you can learn everything for food, which I'm sure this audience will agree with, and is passionate and makes sure that she can, work her budget. But I know food teachers who are taking in the food for the children because they know they can't afford it. And it's hopeless if we don't make serious efforts to teach children about food. We're lost. And I've been bleating about this, saying the same thing for 55 years, 60 years.
Yeah.
60 years.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's better. In fact, right now, there's some wonderful charities doing amazing things in schools. Absolutely amazing things. I mean, I think one of them that I really think is fantastic is a charity called Chefs in Schools. And it's started by Henry Dimbleby. And he just realized that there's so many young men who are unhappy in the restaurant trade because they never see their children. Because if you're in the restaurant trade, you work every night and you work all weekend. So he lures them out of the restaurant world with, look, you can work in a school, it'll be far more satisfying, but you have to teach the children about food as well as just feed them. You have to, they're the dinner ladies, but they're also the food teachers. And it works amazingly well. And you end up with children who will always, little children, he works mostly in primary school. Small children want to please teacher. It's the great difference between that and secondary school. In primary school, they really want to do what the teacher does. And if the teacher is the chef and he gives you lovely food, you want to sit next to him at lunch and he sits down with you or she sits down with you. And you're growing food in the school. God, those kids, in a year, they are eating healthy food and liking it. So it can be done.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that that is the thing that, you know,
Yeah.
needs to be focused on? That's the thing
That's
that's
right.
really going to make a difference.
As long as it's an all-over food education, as long as they're learning about sustainability and provenance and health and nutrition and everything, and learning to cook. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
I know, I want Keir Starmer here.
I think it's a really, really good point.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think about, to go back to that idea of you trying to encourage like men into your evening cooking classes and stuff, like I feel quite lucky to have grown up in an era when there was this kind of glamour and onus on, like, you know, like men cooking, and it was Jamie sliding down the banister.
Jamie did made a huge difference. I mean, Jamie prancing around our screens, you know, saying, you know, what did he used to say? Something Tucker?
Pucker tucker.
Pucker tucker. And you know, it just made it cool to cook. And then suddenly middle-class young lads were coming to our cookery school. It's now about 50-50.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they just said to their parents, no, I really do want to do it. You know? No, I don't want to go and be a banker.
I wonder, yeah, do you see that in Bake Off as well, to go back to my point at the top? You know, 15 years, like it's fascinating to see people that have grown up watching the show. Like, it must be like, what's it like for like you to like kind of see the different personalities that come in, the different influences, the different things that people are cooking? That is that, you know,
and one of the lovely things about Bake Off is we always encourage the bakers to bring their own personality or background or love of food into their baking. And I mean, I had 11 years on the Great British Menu, and that was a much harder job, because if you think you're judging top chefs and they're competing to do a banquet, each of them is going to have to do 4 courses. And you know what chefs are like. They can't just put one thing in the plate. They have to put a whole lot of extra little bits and bobs. And they want you to taste it all, you know. Whereas with cake, in a single teaspoon, you can get the filling, the icing, and the frosting. You know, the filling, the icing, and the cake, all in one. So as long as you're disciplined and only eat 1 teaspoon, you're okay. I mean, it's interesting. Next time you watch Bake Off, count the times that Paul takes a second mouthful and the time that I do. Paul, I've never known him take 2 mouthfuls. He always judges it on 1. And I always say I'm going to do that, and I absolutely can't resist going back for a second dib, you know.
But that's part of the joy of it as well, right? What viewers respond to.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think this is probably something that we can sort of relate to each other about. It's kind of horrible, like watching yourself like really cram your face like on the screen. It's like an awful thing.
I
It's
don't
like
watch myself.
Yeah, you don't watch, do you?
I don't watch it. I don't watch it at all. I mean, occasionally my husband, who watches it, makes me watch one, and I'm so vain. I can't bear. All I'm thinking is, I'm not thinking about the bakers and how they're doing or anything. I'm just thinking, why has the camera gone round the side? That's my absolute. You know, all my fat places are showing. You know. And why can't I remember to keep my chin up so you can't see all the stringy bits underneath?
I feel like at this point I have to say that Polly and I spent most of our time in the green room a minute ago just going, how amazing does Prue look? Like, oh my God, she looks incredible, and just doing that. And I feel like that is kind of like the standard sentiment. You look incredible, you look unbelievable. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, drop the skincare regime, drop the secret. Stop holding out on us.
I'll tell you what, I think I might have even written to them once, but I've been asked so often, you know, what is your beauty regime, you see? And to be absolutely honest, what it is I steal those little bottles from the hotels, you know, called body cream or something or other, hand lotion. I mean, it's all the same stuff. Doesn't matter what it. And I always remember Anita Roddick saying years ago that there's no basic difference between a 300-pound bottle of anti-wrinkle magic and what the sort of primitive people would have done, which is put mutton fat on their faces. Because all it is you need moisturizer.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I steal these little bottles. But if I run out, I buy Nivea, because Nivea is not expensive, and it doesn't pretend that you need lots of different ones for different... You know, if you buy a bottle of Nivea, they really should pay me to say this. If you buy a Nivea shower gel, or whatever it's called, it says for body, hair, and face or something. You can wash everything with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So basically, I wash and I put some sort of anybody's cream on. But I thought if I said to Nivea that I would be their brand ambassador or something, you know, this old lady. But I don't think they even answered my letters. But
outrageous from Nivea.
I thought this might be a really good gig, I think.
Nivea, if there's anyone that can sort of open any door, listen, come and get me, please. Like, you know, let's make it happen.
No, but I think you know, my mum had great skin, and I live well. You know, I have a really happy life, and I think the thing that keeps you young, if you like, or enthusiastic, is that if you like your life, if you're happy. And, you know, if you're miserable, you can't blame people for wanting to just put their head down and not get up and not do anything, because if you're unhappy, you can't do anything. And so I'm happy, and I sleep very well. You know, I can sleep at any moment, and extra hour, you know, put my head down, I'm out. And I always sleep the whole night through. And then I eat well. You know, I don't eat... I'm not on any fancy diet. I don't believe in all of those things. I just think you should eat a mixture of food, and it should be home cooked, and it should not be full of, you know, ultra-processed rubbish. And, you know, it should be cooked from scratch if you can possibly do that.
I have heard that you are quite a fan of a Muller corner, though. Am I right in thinking that?
I do love a Muller corner. And I mean, I'm not a snob about food. I mean, I make a great trifle. I'm really famous for my trifle. But what it is, the truth of the matter is, it's any stale cake or croissant or raisin bread or anything that's knocking about. You put some kind of spread on it, whatever you think would go, lemon curd or honey or marmalade or jam or whatever. And then you soak it with whatever kind of booze you think would be good. Really, really lots of booze is important. And then, this is the big trick, you get supermarket packet custard, ready-made. Cut the top off, lots of custard, and then whipped cream on top. And then you can decorate it with all those bits in the larder, you know, a few glacé cherries, a few nuts, a few... You know, chocolate Maltesers on top is great.
Oh, come on.
And you make it look pretty. You can put edible flowers on top if you like, and it looks fantastic, and it tastes great. And you don't put jelly in it.
Yeah.
Jelly is a disaster.
I love that. I was going to ask, when you were talking there about fad diets and things like that, I did wonder what you thought, just in a sort of almost philosophical way, about... you know, injections, the like of kind of Ozempic,
Ozempic, I think.
Manjaro.
I'm really conflicted about Ozempic. I mean, in my heart and soul, I think this is wrong. You know, you're relying on something totally artificial to do a job that in a proper society you wouldn't have to do. But on the other hand, I can see that it's very tempting for the NHS, because if they can save the NHS millions of pounds by making sure they don't have everybody coming in overweight. And, you know, I think something 40% of our health problems are caused by bad diet. But I suppose I'm sort of old-fashioned enough to just think it's such a pity we can't just go back to eating proper food. You know, I love that sort of maxim that you should never eat anything with any ingredient in it that your mother wouldn't recognize. You know, so if it's got something called, you know, stabilizer or emulsifier, or all of these things are in there to change the texture of stuff so that it goes down quickly. And then what the manufacturers are after is that you should still be hungry when you've eaten a lot of it. And so they need you to eat very fast. Because if you eat very slowly, you know, you were told as with children, chew properly and all that stuff. If you chew your food, and you have to chew it, it takes you longer to get it down you. And so by the time you know very quickly when you've had enough and you're no longer hungry, you can eat an awful lot of ice cream and not know that, and still feel hungry because it goes down so fast. So that's what the emulsifiers are for. The stabilizer to make it last forever, or a long time. And ideally, I'd like us not to rely on those things.
I'm going to throw to questions in a moment, so I hope people have some. But I just wonder, you know, the running theme, the amount that you've done. You mentioned the happiness of your life and living well, and it's really words to live by. Are there still things that you'd like to do that you can't feel like, oh, that is just the one thing? Because I guess to go back to that first question, or when we were talking about the supercharging effect of Bake Off, I imagine suddenly there was kind of a real scramble of things that you could accomplish and you could do. Are there still things that are kind of...
Well, I mean, on the business side, one of the things that has made it possible for me to do is have my own, you know, specs range.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And, what have I got on there? This is not mine, and this is not mine. But I do have a necklace range, a jewelry range, which is all not expensive. I mean, there are no pearls and diamonds there. And I'm a born trader. I just love selling stuff, you see. So, and nobody would have been interested in me doing that if I hadn't got some sort of profile. So Bake Off did that. And you're right, Bake Off has meant that people, because I'm better known, they offer me things all the time. And of course, because I'm greedy and I love it. So you know, I get the odd upgrade and I get the odd free theatre ticket, and I'm unashamedly pleased to go. It's lovely. But so it has made a huge difference to me. But I think if you're asking me what ambitions I have for the future, I think the one thing that I have never managed to pull off is that this is very egotistical of me, but I think I'm a better novel writer than I am a cookery writer. And I would dearly love to have one of my novels made into a film. And I've had a few of them have been very often taken up by some producer about, you know, in development, and it never happens. You know, the film business is notorious for, you know, I think it's something like only 3% of, you know, that stack of pitches gets looked at, and then only 3% of those get any further, and then only 3% get into development, and then so, you know, by the end you've got practically no chance. And so I have never managed to get one of my books on the screen, which I would dearly love to do. And I want more time to travel more. I mean, John and I was my second husband, and he is a great traveller, and so we love travelling. My first husband, who I love dearly, but he was a writer and a recluse, and the last thing he wanted to go do was travelling. So like this year, we've been to Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan.
Wow.
And those are fascinating. It's just fascinating to go to countries which are so different from your culture. Food is different, you know, the religion is different, the architecture is different, the scenery is different. It's just so exciting. I love it.
Brilliant. There's that curiosity and hunger. Prue Leith, thank you so much. That was amazing.
You are so good.
Do we have some questions? I think we've got a bit of time. We've got like 10, 15 minutes. Who's going to be first? The gentleman there. Person there. Hello. I think there's a microphone coming.
Thank you very much for a great chat.
Oh.
My question is, did you have any trouble eating your children? No, sorry, I meant... Did you
Eating my children.
Exclusive!
have any problem
We've got an exclusive.
eating?
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Say that again. Sorry.
Did I have any trouble feeding my children? Well,
Yes.
you know, I did. And the truth is that my daughter is adopted and she's Cambodian. And she has always been wonderfully interested in food and very keen to learn to cook and will try anything and loves a bit of spice. In fact, sometimes I think that she must have some kind of folk memory because although she left Cambodia when she was 3 months old or something and had never had anything except a bottle, she just loves chili and has always loved chili and a bit of spice. My son, on the other hand, has never really liked, as a child, all he really wanted was meat and potatoes, no veg. And I stupidly did not worry too much about the lack of veg because I thought, well, he eats a lot of fruit and he eats frozen peas and carrots. So, you know, it's not too terrible that he doesn't like most veg. And I didn't force him or manage to persuade him. But then when he was 17 and he got a girlfriend and he went to his girlfriend's house, he got so embarrassed that he wasn't eating the veg. He said, Mum, I have to learn to eat veg because I can't go on putting it in my turnips and in my pockets, sneaking the veg, because he couldn't admit that he didn't want to eat it. And so he had heard me banging on about some wonderful method to get children to eat veg, which was all about the number of times you try it. And so he started that, and he taught himself in about a few months to eat all the veg. They was well motivated.
Yeah. Well, my book is about being quite a fussy eater growing up, ironically enough, and there's some hidden school mashed potato in my pocket, just as a little primer. So yeah, I'll have to get together with Danny and we'll swap tips for where you could hide vegetables. That was a great question. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, just at the back there. Yeah, third row in. Is that? Thank you.
Prue, I read earlier. I was reading up on you on Wikipedia actually, that you had been the first female board member of British Rail. Considering that it's being renationalised, could you come back and say food on the railways, please?
Oh, heavens. Actually, I was really lucky because at the time that suddenly all chairmen of all boards suddenly wanted to have a woman on the board, and they just wanted a statutory woman. I mean, because they were getting a lot of pressure from shareholders saying, you know, they'd go to a shareholders meeting and they'd see, 12 grey suits on the platform. And I remember the chairman of Safeway, when he asked me to join his board, he said, I'm really tired of answering the question, 90% of your customers are women, 70% of your staff are women. How come there's no women on the board? And he said, it's really embarrassing, so I need somebody, so will you come and be that somebody? and my attitude was always, I don't care how, what their motive is, as long as when I get there, I'm allowed to do the job.
Yeah.
And so, that was it. And I mean, I would never have got that British Rail job if it wasn't. This was in the days when chairmen chose their board. Nowadays, you have to go through headhunters and there's a whole quota, whole thing, and you have to make sure that you're being absolutely fair about it. In those days, the chairman just chose his chums, really. And the chairman of British Rail was my husband's best friend and played tennis with him every Sunday. But then he did know he knew my restaurant, he knew my catering company, because we fed his company quite a lot before he was with British Rail. chairman of Mitsubishi, and so and they were clients of mine. So he didn't know that I ran a business, and there were very few women who were running big catering companies or anything. So I was lucky. But the business of privatization is just one long, desperate saga, isn't it? I mean, it's been, I think, a complete disgrace that we privatized everything, because the people who owned those companies have made a huge amount of money. Meanwhile, the companies have often gone bust or been very badly run, and it seemed like raping, didn't it? Just, buy a company, treat it badly, get the government to pay.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I think it's a good thing that rail track will now go back into.
Yeah. What were the challenges then, and do you think, if you have any insight now into like getting the food to be any better, do you think people want it to be better, like, or do you think
they do, and
how does it compare with how it was?
I don't think LNAR don't do a bad job. They're trying really hard with food. It is difficult because you have all sorts of different people on the train. They've got to eat in a small place. There's no room for kitchens anymore, so they don't cook on the train. It has to be something that can be reheated and so on. So it's not the easiest catering job in the world, but if they keep it simple, they can do it quite well, or buy in really good products. I mean, the thing that LNAR are doing, and I think it is interesting, is they've got the best local artisan suppliers on their route who just supply a certain quantity of whatever it is. So say you're having a lemon posset little pot of pudding and it's delicious. They'll run out probably, or might, but it's bad luck. But they just decided what they're going to serve is going to be really good. And they'll try and guess right how many to buy. Yeah. But it's all bought in, but it's bought in from good companies.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's one of the things that I learned. You can still be so prejudiced for so much of your life and not realize. I mean, when I joined the hospital food review for the government in the days when Matt Hancock was the Secretary of State for Health, before he kissed himself goodbye in that wonderfully dramatic way. But he was a really good health secretary, and he saw the point of food, and he thought that food in hospital was really important, and he persuaded me to join it. And I came in with the absolute conviction that the only way we'd get good hospital food is if you had kitchens that were near the wards, if the food was freshly cooked and on-site and local and all the rest of it. And then we did a survey, in fact, of all the food in all the hospitals in the country, and what the customers thought of it, and how local it was, how good it was nutritionally and all the rest of it. And we discovered that there was absolutely no difference between the amount of people who did good food because they cared about it and it was local, and people who just bought from really good suppliers. And when you think about it, M&S make very good ready meals, say. And that comes out of a factory. The fact that it comes out of a factory is not the problem. It's what happens in the factory. If they're doing good food, properly cooked from real ingredients, and buying the best ingredients, it's going to be good out of a factory. So that I had to change my tune a bit.
Always learning, and that's interesting. Change.
But interesting, if any of you are interested in whatever happened to that food review, because then of course Matt and a succession of other health secretaries followed him, and I was really frightened that what would happen is that a health secretary would just come along and take away the money for improving hospital food, and give it to some new project that he cared about or she cared about. But it hasn't happened, and it is just quietly going on. But it is going to take a long time, because a lot of it depends on moving kitchens or on changing the system from regeneration of really awful food. And new hospitals will be all the new hospitals that are going to be built will be much better. And the ones that the health trusts believe in our message are changing very rapidly and doing really much better. And I'll give you a tiny example. One hospital told me that they had a real problem with their staff because they were doing 12-hour shifts, and the only thing they got to eat in 12 hours overnight, in a nighttime shift, was out of a vending machine and cold. So, you know, a chocolate bar and a Coke. That was basically the diet. So they were spending a lot of time walking down. The fact that all the staff were spending a lot of time going down to Costa's down the road or something. And so the boss of the hospital thought, actually, if we had a decent coffee shop in the hospital that everybody could come to, and we just let the staff have it free, we'd probably pay for the coffee shop. And indeed they do. So, you know, first of all, they just hired a barista and an assistant. And between them, they did all the cleaning for the little shop, and and it worked so well that it's now a really good coffee shop.
That's great.
So it's such a, you know, it's a lovely thing when business can save the place because somebody's thinking imaginatively.
Yeah, and things can be better, definitely. Thank you. It's a great question and point. Yes, just there. Sorry, and then you be next. Yeah, sorry, just in the middle.
I have to say, Prue, it was excellent hearing about all your failures because it gives the rest of us hope, right? So thank you for sharing. But my question is, you've done so many things in your life. What would you count as your best achievement?
Good question.
I think the thing I'm most proud of is the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square, because that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't started. I was driving past Trafalgar Square and I saw that there was this, I mean, I'd known that plinth for 20 years. It had been sitting there with nothing on it except pigeon poo. And it was obviously built for a statue. And I thought, this is ridiculous. So I wrote to the Daily Mail or to the Evening Standard and said, why can't they put back whatever was originally there? It just looks so like a great stump in the middle of. And everybody wrote in saying, silly woman doesn't realize there's never been anything on that. That square was laid out in 1830 or 1840 or something. And the idea was William IV was going to go on that statue on a horse. And he paid for the statue to be made, but then he died, and he was so unpopular that nobody would put it up. And so it never went up. And then nobody could ever agree what would go up. And I very quickly discovered I had the same problem, that if I suggested, I had a little committee, if one of us suggested somebody else would object. You could never get agreement about a hero.
Consensus, yeah.
So we very quickly gave up the idea of a hero and thought, well, what about just good art? And then one of my committee, who's a lovely guy called James Lingwood, who has an art company called Art Angel, and they do happenings and different installations and things. He said, why don't we just have contemporary art that is temporary, that is going to come down, and then nobody will object, because if you're going to object to some sculpture you hate up there, and I must say there have been some I've thought absolutely awful. But there's no point in complaining, because long before your complaint is going to be even looked at, the statue will be down again. So that was the trick. And I'm very proud of it, because it's been such a success. And the school teachers love it, because it's a project for kids to come and decide what they'd put on the statue. And they learn about Trafalgar Square and all the rest of it. And then the tourist board love it, because it shows that Britain is not just good at, the average tourist thinks we're all about castles and the royal family and beef eaters and so on, but that we're really good at contemporary art. And so I love the fact that it changes all the time. So I think I'm proudest of that.
Yeah, brilliant. I think we've got time for just one more, and yes, the lone person with their hand up there. feel the pressure build as the mic gets passed down. Got to be good, got to nail it.
I actually had quite a serious question, so I'm going to change it on the spot.
Oh, no.
When
I
you
feel
have
bad.
a big night out, what is your drunken snack of choice?
If you have late night out, what's your drunken
what do I
snack
come
of
back and
choice? Your
eat?
drunken snack of choice.
Well, I'm so greedy. I probably eat anything that's in the fridge. But my snack of choice is either a Bounty bar. I love coconut and chocolate. I just love. Or I will. My husband makes really good yogurt almost every day, and we eat a lot of yogurt. And I will have a bowl of that, and I'll put, like they have in Greece, honey and almonds on top of it, and I, just wolf down a whole lot of that.
Yeah, that's good. Why not both?
Or both. Yeah. With a Bounty bar on top, perhaps.
An amazing question. Thank you so much. I'm going to be signing copies of Settlers. Picky isn't available yet, but I think you can grab it. And I don't know if Prue, are you doing some bits after? Yeah,
sure.
She's going to be signing her amazing book. Thank you so much. That was amazing. We could talk and talk, I feel. Should we just do it again tomorrow night? And we'll do part 2. Please give a really, really big round of applause for the amazing Dame Prue Leith.
Thank you so much. Don't get up yet. You're not allowed out yet.
Okay.
Just to say thank you both so much for a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being a fantastic audience. We've been from South Africa to Paris to London. We're in a bedsitter. We're in the Wolsey. We have travelled extensively through your life. It's been wonderful. No one's going to forget that image of the teeth in the burnt marmalade ever in their lives. So you've left us with that forever. But this is exactly what food does and what the food season does, and what a fantastic way to kick off the 2025 food season. Thank you, Prue, for so generously agreeing to be here, and Jimmy for this wonderful conversation that felt like that you were in your own personal conversation. We were invited in. It was just beautiful. Thank you. Everybody check out the food season. Come again. We love to see you all, and thank you very much.